Hey everyone, and welcome back to the One Church podcast. I'm joined today by my good friend and brother-in-law, Mr. Eddie Rich.
You are, yes. Thank
Eddie
you very
Rich,
much for having us along.
Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, actually. Thank you, Nathan. And you?
I'm good. You have then, let's jump straight in. You have written a lot recently, done a big piece on creation concern.
Indeed, yeah.
So, 2 questions on that. What is it? And why do you care about that? To spend a lot of time writing about it? Why are you passionate about that particular topic?
Okay. I think growing up, I've always been interested in nature and the environment. So be that Springwatch or be that Blue Planet, I've always enjoyed those kind of programs and enjoying that. I enjoy going for walks out on hills and in the countryside and singing as you dance along kind of thing, these country lanes. No, seriously, I've just always enjoyed nature. And so as part of our masters, we're writing this 18,000 word dissertation. I wanted to write about something that I was vaguely interested in and actually would give me some angles and avenues to go down, of which suddenly I've got this window of opportunity to research, which you don't normally get actually generally. Something of which I thought, okay, this could have quite a big impact on myself and some questions of which I wanted to answer.
Yeah.
So hence why I did it on creation concern.
Okay, great. What is that?
Well, I guess the best way, what most people would be familiar with, is environmentalism. So
Yes.
environmentalism, you think about Extinction Rebellion, you think about Greta and all of that kind of jazz.
Yeah, quite prominent in media.
Yeah, absolutely.
Recently.
If you look on the BBC, I think their third heading is climate. If you look on Sky News, their third heading is climate. If you go on The Guardian, climate crisis is their second heading.
Wow.
So it is a topic of conversation that people are talking about.
Yeah.
So
Why do you think that is?
I think that there is a growing awareness. You know, like we talk about the world is now a village as opposed to this global entity. And so people with their smartphones can literally show you an image from the other side of the world very quickly. And we're becoming more aware of those kind of things.
Yeah.
I think also there is an awakening potentially with our position within the planet, within the ecosystems of which we live, and our dependency on those things. And people are being more aware of the damage that we've done to those. But I think there's a selfish position on that. It's not just the damage we've done to the ecology of an area or the degradation to the ecology of an area. It's actually how's that now impacting on me and my children or on my neighbour. And so those things are, I think, the reality is it's bad news and bad news sells. So I think the media is really peddling that.
That's the media angle potentially.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And so I think environmentalism has that edge to it, has a very, very negative connotation to it.
Yeah.
Whereas creation concern comes at it with a hope. And
Right.
that's the difference with that. So creation concern starts from a Christian message of hope.
Yeah.
Whereas environmentalism says, look, we've just utterly wrecked this place and it's hopeless. We're all doomed. Look what we're doing. We're gonna melt the ice caps. We're gonna drown all the polar bears, and then we're gonna.
Yeah.
Who knows what's the repercussions?
So, like in the news, what you would say is quite prominent. You would define that as environmentalism, activism about the environment. Maybe a reason why that is because negative news sells. It's easier to click on to think the world's going to end in X amount of years, which you would say is quite hopeless then. Contrast that with environmental concern. What is that? You touched on it briefly then.
Yeah, so it's creation concern, not environmental concern.
Sorry.
Just because it is a key thing. Because what grounds this is that actually we're on a planet which was created, not just is the consequence of a big bang, and we're all monkeys that got lucky. So there's this very specific reference, which is like, okay, so God had a plan right at the beginning, and God has a plan right now. And the way in which I drive my car or the way in which I source my food is not a surprise to God. And the impact of those things is not a surprise to God. And I would argue that the biblical text suggests that there is redemption available for the planet as well. Not just available, but God's plan is going to be outworked in that way.
Yeah.
And so we have this wonderful opportunity. And how do we partner with God with regards to the redemption of a planet, not just humanity as well? So there's these twofold things of which come together.
Yeah.
And that's what I was really interested in exploring.
Sure.
Because I think as a church, I speak very generically now, the church has a happy theology on salvation and on the redemption of humanity. We are uncomfortable about our theology on creation.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, we've probably not engaged in those conversations because we've handed them over to the scientists, we've handed them over to the various different origin arguments, and feel that we're unequipped to be able to speak into something of which is so grounded within those arguments.
Yeah.
And therefore, as a consequence, we're not speaking into something of which is the second or third headline on all these news kind of banners.
Right.
And our message of hope is being lost in that noise of fear and doom and gloom. And actually, well, here's an opportunity for us to speak into something and to really bring a message of hope. Because there is hope, because there's a God who loves us, and because he cares. The damage that we've done might seem so big and seem so difficult to try to come back into line and put it back. But then, you have a crowd of several thousand people and Jesus just has a couple of fish and a few bits of bread and he manages to feed them all because the partnership of God with man is miraculous. And we're very happy as a church looking at that with reference to humanity's scenario. Well, I just wanted to explore, well, what about God partnering with man with reference to bringing healing and redemption to creation?
Well, let's focus on that a sec then. So you have been a Christian for how many years?
22 years.
22 years. Been attending a church for that duration of time? More than 22 years?
Yeah.
How much more?
25, 26, 27 years, almost 30 now. It's going up, in it.
Give or take 8 years.
It's less than 30, but it's more than 12.
Yeah, you're in that stage of your life. It's just a bit of a blur. Yeah. Let's call it 30.
Thanks.
Yes, okay. Yeah. In that length of time,
Yep.
would you say then, and you have alluded to this, the church hasn't focused on creation concern. It's not really been prominent in its focus, in its teaching, in its emphasis. If that's true, why not?
Okay, so
Why is it not a concern for us?
Yeah, I think I've possibly only ever heard one person speak into it in a very indirect way. So it was when I was youth pastor, and Derek Smith was the guy that just made this throwaway question, and he just said, we like to think we are totally focused on the next generation. That's why we're giving our Friday nights and we're giving our weekdays and our weeknights and our weekends and all that kind of stuff.
In the context of youth ministry.
Youth pastoring and all that kind of stuff. And then he just said, but the true test of how focused you are and how much your heart is on the future generation is your recycling bin. Show me your recycling bin, because actually, and what he was trying to say is, if you do have a focus on the next generation, the way you act is going to be different. And it just really challenged me. It's one of those things which has always kind of like remained with us. And the reality is, you could use that in all sorts of context with regards to the recycling bin, because it's just like, it's a sign to say, actually, I have changed the way I'm living because I recognize something which is more important than the convenience that I've got of my big black bin. And I think that's probably the only time I've heard a Christian message speak into it. I've heard of totally the opposite Christian message, that we've been given dominion over the world, and so therefore it's for us to kind of pillage it as much as we like.
Do what we want with.
And so I've heard that.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why the church historically, from your vantage point at least, has been quite quiet on it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I wouldn't put all of my argumentative eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
I would say there's probably several of those. But the fact that there's several leans to this lack of concerted position on creation and on environmentalism and on ecology and on our responsibility for those kind of things. So I don't think it's down to one particular position. I think it's probably we have a very human-focused, self-focused gospel. So, and phrases which we would absolutely die for. So, like, if we were the only person that would ever believe in Jesus, Jesus would still have died for us. I absolutely fundamentally believe that. But also in Colossians, it says that actually all of creation is going to get redeemed by the blood of Christ. So even if you were the only one, Jesus would have died for you. But at the same time, the earth was going to come along and heaven was going to come along as well. So this position of which we put forward to emphasize the love of Christ is also a position that the biblical authors have presented to say, actually, creation holds the same place in God's mission as you do and I do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me just play devil's advocate for a second then to push back on that. So, me,
very used to it, Nath.
Why should I, just me on my own,
Yeah.
why should I care about creation concern? Because surely my little recycling bin is just a drop in the ocean, and I'm a busy man.
Yeah,
I've got lots to focus on.
Yeah.
Why should this be a priority for me?
It's-
If well, I think, to play devil's advocate, my little actions aren't going to make that much difference
Yeah,
anyway. Why should I
absolutely.
be concerned?
First thing is, I hope your recycle bin doesn't become just dropped in the ocean, because that's one of the problems.
Yeah, it's quite convenient though. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's at the beach.
Absolutely. No, I get that.
I've never done that.
Yeah, that's good.
Good.
Quite
Yeah,
pleased.
thanks.
Because you live a long way from the sea.
True.
But I think, number one is, I think it aligns us with the heart of God. So when you read in Romans 8, there's this passage that people may know but not necessarily have kind of grappled with massively. So Romans 8, and it talks about, like, we know that all of creation groans with the expectation of the revealing of the children of God, because it's been put under this frustration or futility because of the curse of Adam's sin. So that's the gist of which it says. And then you have, within that context, you've got these, what's called, some people call it like the trio of lamenters. So you've got creation groaning, you've got humanity groaning, and you've got the Spirit of God groaning. What's really interesting is Paul is very clearly presenting that there's a unifying there between those groanings that are taking place. And the heart of God, by the Spirit groaning for the situation and the frustration that creation finds itself in, is the same as it is for us. And the whole context of which Paul is talking about in Romans 8 is he's comparing, like, suffering that's going to take place with what's going to happen. And actually, like, this stuff is nothing in comparison to the glorious future that we have in Christ. But he's positioning a unifying, a solidarity with creation and humanity. And he's saying actually that there is a partnership, there's a plight of which they both share. And the Spirit of God is lamenting the situation on both of them. And actually that's the famous context where we pray or we preach, we inspire people to say, like, oh, we don't know how to pray, so the Spirit prays for us. Well, the whole context of that is that whole passage that he's talking about. So we don't know how to pray, so the Spirit helps us with groans and all that jazz. Well, that context is all within this bigger picture of the redemption plan that God's got for creation and for you and me. So I think, number one, is the reason why it's important is because I think the biblical narrative conveys that there's an importance to creation.
Yeah.
I think ultimately we may not necessarily find our identity until we find our identity as an image bearer. So there's a whole kind of theological take on that. With reference to us, we are functioning as a role to bring flourishing to the planet and flourishing to one another. So if you look at what Jesus talks about, the kingdom of God and how that's bringing a flourishing to people, actually our identity, we will find our identity when we are pursuing the flourishing of one another and the planet around us. And when we are not pursuing those two things, then I don't think we'll ever be settled in our identity.
Great. Is there hope? Do you have hope?
Absolutely. Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely.
we spoke about this, didn't we? That the narrative in the media can feel a little hopeless.
Yeah.
This is all going to end in an icy death anyway.
Yeah.
In years to come, and we are wrecking everything as we live now.
Absolutely. And that's why I think, like, we need to get competent in our conviction and in conveying our conviction, because our conviction stems from hope.
Yeah.
So we're not speaking into this going, we're all doomed. We're speaking into this going, like, God has got a great plan and he invites us to be a part of his plan. So we can start, rather than trying to live to save the world, we live savingly in the world. So we are living a lifestyle of which is bringing a flourishing to the planet and is bringing a flourishing, therefore, to one another. So if you think, I know we would have all quoted this, but Jesus gives this narrative and he says, look, you might be doing these great things in my name. You might be prophesying, you might be healing, you might be da-da-da-da-da, but I don't know you. And the reason why I don't know you is because when I look at the poorest amongst you, you haven't given them a drink of water. You haven't given them a coat. And he says, and so there's this thing which doesn't seem to align, because you're like, going, oh, you're doing all these amazing things. But actually the practicalities of causing others to flourish is missing. Well, what if, and we wouldn't be doing this deliberately, but what if the way that we are choosing to live, particularly in the West, but generically, the way in which we are choosing to live is preventing people from having a glass of water. Are we, to phrase it slightly differently, are we withholding a cup of water from Jesus because of our lifestyles? Now, we would never, ever assign to that. We would say, no, absolutely, where Jesus, that's where I want to be. But almost by our lifestyle, we're conveying something of which is going very directly against what Jesus talks about. And that's why I think actually there is this wonderful opportunity for us to be involved and engaged in these conversations about the planet. Because actually, if we have a healthy planet, we'll have a healthy us. If we're allowing the planet to flourish, then we'll be allowing and enabling people to flourish. And it's through that flourishing, I think, God is really glorified. And that voice is missing into this whole debate, because this debate is, as we've said, really, really kind of high on the negative language.
Yeah.
Whereas,
high on the negative in media and silence on emphasis within the church.
Yeah. So the people that have the monopoly on hope are silent on what is the biggest topic potentially going on at the moment, with the most negative edge to it.
Wow.
And surely we want to have the hope language into that.
Yeah.
So that's why I think, and we don't just want to have the language, we don't just want the rhetoric, we've got to have the practicality behind it. So the reason why you do your recycling bin is because it gives credibility for you to say, oh, actually, we do have a concern for the planet. I'm recycling because I am living for the next generation. Like I love, it's funny, I love going to the tip with my kids, because my kids hate the tip because they've been around me too much. So we drive down to this place in Gloucester, it's just outside of the city, and it's just this hill of stuff where they've just filled it and whatever. Yeah. And actually what I say to kids, I go, this is my generation and the generation before us saying, we don't care about you, because the easiest thing for us, rather than to recycle or think about the future, is to dump it in the ground. And what we're doing there is we are making something which is of so much use and so much potential unobtainable for a future generation. And I said, so I hate going there. It's one of those things. And obviously, there's some recycling aspects that go on there. So please do go there to recycle. But this, you can't say, actually, I am looking out for the future generation and just kind of it's not a word, toxifying the environment in which that future generation are going to live.
Poisoning.
Yeah, poisoning is a good word. Yeah. Toxifying.
Is toxifying a word? I don't know.
It's a whole new podcast.
Yeah, good. And you stepped into some practical things that anyone can do there. But what can we do? So say if someone's heard this, they agree with you, they agree with that theological position of aligning with the heart of God that wants to redeem humanity, but also creation, wants the planet to flourish in order that humanity might flourish. I love what you said about Jesus saying, are you looking after the poorest among you? Like, if not, you're withholding from me. What a great challenge. If we've accepted that, heard that, what can we do? What can I do in response to creation concern?
I think ultimately it's going to be about consideration of the way you live. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is probably the most unpalatable part of it, is suddenly something of which before didn't have any kind of moral weight to it. So what I drive, how I drive, where I buy my clothes from, where I, et cetera, all of those things suddenly have a weight to it. And I don't think it's something where you can suddenly make a change overnight. I think there is this journey of which we are to go on.
Yeah.
And it's like, so the way I live, I am trying to be redemptive in the way that I live. But I'm hoping that tomorrow I'll be more redemptive in the way that I live. In the way that today, hopefully, I'm living more redemptive than how I was yesterday in regards to how I'm trying to do life. So how am I trying to sort clothes and do my recycling and do those kind of things? Because the reality is, so like batteries, for example, little daft thing, like our local recycling no longer collects batteries. So the easiest thing is, and I know you shouldn't, but the easiest thing is to put them in a black bin. And I bet the majority of batteries go in black bins. But if you take them to the supermarket, they've got the battery recycling things, which actually the reason why they're so important to go to those places is because they leach out when they are put into landfill. And they are poisoning the waterways and they are poisoning the ground. And so something of which we've never thought about, but now we have an increased awareness of, is the health of soil is dreadful because of the rubbish that we're putting into it and piling onto it. So how do I live differently? How do I try to think about the way that I am doing my garden? So I have, at the moment, we have like a little area out the front, which is the plastic grass.
AstroTurf.
And just
artificial grass,
yeah, artificial grass, because it just used to be like the stones out the front. And since I've gone on this journey, it's like, okay, actually, we will never have that again.
Okay.
In our house, because of just it's what's called it's not even that. It's you can have things called like a monoecology. So there's just one kind of form of life that's there, and on artificial grass, it's probably just spiders. And whereas actually, when you have like the plants and you have mosses and you have all the different things that's going there, well, actually, you're encouraging beetles, you're encouraging insects, you're encouraging birds, you're encouraging all of those other things, of which suddenly then there's a flourishing of life rather than a nice image that looks like it's life, but it's just convenience and it's got no life in it. And they're the kind of things. So I think little steps that we can take begin to make a difference. So the way in which we look after our lawns, the way in which we look after those things, are little things that we can do that actually I think God will bless. But then there's bigger things of which we step towards. So I was reading just the other day, this is how sad it sounds sometimes, reading the other day about how in Canada and in France, so these two countries that you'd never think would have an issue, have a water shortage for their locals because big corporate companies are withdrawing all of the water to fill the plastic bottles that you and I drink out of. And it's like suddenly it's having a detrimental impact in a Western culture like France, obviously just a couple of dozen miles away if you live on the south coast. And actually there's water shortages that are taking place in that place because these big corporations are draining all of the water out. So how can I impact? How can I make a difference on that? Well, actually, maybe it's not to be constantly drinking out of the plastic bottles. And actually, how do I utilize tap water? How do I put pressure on my local suppliers to make sure that they're doing stuff in a good way and that actually that water is being looked after in a better way? Because by doing that, I'm helping people flourish. I will never meet Francois in central France with his kind of
living
water
in Croissant?
shortage. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it's right in the centre. Do you know?
Yeah, there's a place called that. Yeah, you told me that.
Yeah, I know.
You may never know him. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. So anyway, whatever his name was, and so he's there and he's having his coffee with his croissant in Croissant, and he can't have his coffee because there's no water because of the way I'm choosing to live, and that's an extreme scenario. But how do I begin to make steps towards that? And I think part of it is just being aware and having that kind of like consideration for those things.
Yeah.
Because, like, I have friends who live in France and of whom are trying to build church. So by default, I'm living this kind of like contradictory life because I'm saying, oh yeah, you go for it, you win these people,
whilst inadvertently taking from.
Yeah. And I'm inadvertently removing their opportunity to flourish by the way that I choose to live.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, it's a selfish way that I live. Something else I was reading just today is about how, like, water tourism. So when we go to countries of which are the hotter kind of beautiful places that we like to go, well, tourists take like 10 to 20 times the amount of water than the locals do. And so just that kind of awareness, it's not saying let's not go to those places, because by going to those places, we can send funds and we can bring money to them and all that kind of stuff. But maybe just being aware of actually there is a consequence that by me allegedly thriving, by having this nice holiday and using the pool and all that kind of stuff, and I'm not against those things, but actually it's having a detrimental impact on the local population.
Yeah, really great, mate. Last question from me on this, really. So, and this is circling back to the narrative that we'll see in the news. You mentioned Greta Thunberg and people like that. With the negative spin on some of these things and almost the pushback that we've seen in regards to them. So we see, is it Stop Oil? Is it Rebellion Extinction? The green, the orange powder that gets put everywhere, the people that stop traffic in the road. That can cause a little bit of, I think, fatigue in people where we just get a bit fed up with it. Like, surely that's an over-exaggeration. And that can end up having a negative effect and the opposite effect of what I imagine these people want. For someone that is just a little bit fed up with it, what can we do when we see the negative narrative or see people stopping traffic and that seems to be causing division? What can we do in response to that?
Yeah. And again, it comes down to this question, like, how am I facilitating other people to thrive? So I'm not a fan of those things. And I know that there are Christians out there that are, and they do actively engage with Extinction Rebellion and Stop Oil and those kind of things. And I actually have admiration for them, for their conviction. I think their methodology is off. Because actually, and maybe they see something and they recognize something that I haven't seen yet or know yet, and that's absolutely possible. And perhaps they're seeing it as like, no, we've got to do something really drastic, because perhaps we are heading towards some kind of
apocalypse.
Yeah, no, I can't see that. I actually cannot see that. What I think is that what we have is an opportunity to work with God in redemption for the planet. So what I want to do is like, how do I get involved in that? How do I look to see where and what is God doing and how can I come alongside those kind of things? And so it's really fascinating when you begin to look for the good news in those things. They really are there. And there's farmers, there's organizations of whom are looking at different ways to engage with, not the planet, that's the wrong phrase, but engage with a healthier ecological process, of which actually causes a upturn in the welfare of animals, the welfare of the ecology, the local ecology, and actually is bringing good, decent food to you and I. I was reading the other day about how the lifespan of the chickens that we generally eat is just over a month, as opposed to half a year or whatever. Yeah.
What, is in the chicken's born and it's killed a month later?
It's that quick because they've developed and harnessed the gene technology or whatever. And those things, like we have friends whom have a little small holding, and they got some hens, I think, from wherever it was anyway. And they just said after about 4 weeks, the legs on the chickens were breaking because they were just too fat. They couldn't walk. And really, I mean, it's like this aspect where we've played with stuff now and there's a detrimental impact that's taking place. Like that chicken isn't flourishing when it's can't even walk. But there is a way in which we can utilize these things, because I do believe God has, by his provision and providence, has given us this wonderful planet that will enable us to flourish. And how do we go about those kind of things? How do we look into those things? And so there may be some times where there needs to be something which is like, okay, I'm no longer going to buy this chicken or whatever. And I might watch a Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall kind of documentary on actually what's taking place. And those things are good to see because it's good to know where that stuff's coming from. My kids recently, well, not recently, a few years ago, they go to a wonderful school, but a local high street shop said, we're going to show the kids where does their food come from. So they gave them a tour of their shop. Okay. And so I'm taking my kids, I'm saying, look, that's not where a chicken comes from. It's not from Tesco's, Morrison, Sainsbury's, whatever. So we took them to Over Farm. Yeah. And I showed them what chickens are, and I showed them what lambs are, and I showed them what pigs are.
And then what happens?
And then we had it for tea. Okay. So going let's understand where this comes from. Yeah. And don't be ignorant to it just because it comes in a package and it says, okay, chicken, whatever. Yeah. You have to understand there's a process behind that. And some of the things of which are really key in our lives are we like to live in ignorance for those processes that go on behind those scenes. And I think the call to creation concern is an awareness of some of the things which are taking place behind the scenes and to have a voice into some of those things. Otherwise, our voice of hope is missing from those scenarios. So to be able to speak into places and say, actually, by upping the standard of living, wrong phrase, of our farm animals and stuff like that, actually means that there is better nutrients in the food of which we are eating. And so we're only really shortcutting ourselves and not allowing ourselves to flourish by some of these things. Whereas actually, if we can say, if our language is one of hope and we bring hope into this thing, say, actually, we want to change because we want to flourish. Yeah. We don't just want to get by. And so therefore the narrative is one of hope, that is like, oh no, look, we can speak into this, because we're not saying, oh, let's super glue ourselves to planes, let's never go global travel, let's not get on trains, let's stop all the cars, those kind of things. We're saying, no, actually these things in proportion are wonderful things of which they provide for us. So, so the ambulances, the air ambulance, the travel, and to be able to see these different places, and to be able to go to these places and bring, finance those places. They're wonderful opportunities that we've got. But how do we utilize them to cause a flourishing for everybody, rather than just for my own kind of wants and needs?
Yeah. Hey, excellent. Good points. Last, any reading or places to point people toward to find out more about this particular topic?
So there are, I think it's a father and son. So it's Douglas Moo and Jonathan Moo.
Yeah.
Which the main reason why I wanted it was because I wanted to quote Moo and Moo. They write quite a lot on creation care and things like that. Okay. They are excellent in how they present those things.
Okay. And
they are giving a narrative of hope.
Yeah.
Rather than one of fear.
Yeah.
And so they speak wonderfully into the subject.
Yeah.
So anything by Moo and Moo.
Great recommendation.
There's a good book like Creation Rejoice, which is by Moo and White.
Hey.
That also has been an excellent book.
Excellent. Thanks, Ed. Genuinely learnt a lot there, and some really challenging stuff for all of us, I think, to question, what do my actions reflect of my beliefs? Like, am I living just for convenience? Do I have a conviction about some of these things? So some really great thoughts and challenges there. So thank you for all the work that you've put into it and for sharing that with us today. And thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you next time.